The story of First Presbyterian Church starts with a railroad. In 1862, as the Civil War raged and the Confederate government sought to keep their supply lines open, a new railroad was commissioned to connect Danville, Virginia to Greensboro, North Carolina. Because of its necessity for the war effort, the railroad was quickly built through much difficulty and was completed in 1863. It proved valuable to the Confederacy as it became the only functional railway to Richmond after General Grant cut the Petersburg to Richmond line during his march in 1864, and its existence is said to have extended the war by many months. And while this new rail line proved to be significant in the history of our nation for good and for ill, it also led to population growth and the birth of a new town situated at the halfway point between Greensboro and Danville. The area had been regularly inhabited since the early 1800s when William Wright set up a store and tavern on the road between Danville and Salem. Reedsville had its first post office as early as 1829 when the Reuben Reed family, who would go on to give the town its name, developed a prosperous farm, store, public inn, and Reuben Reed served as Justice of the Peace. His son, David Reed, who would later serve as United States Congressman, Governor of North Carolina, and United States Senator, served as the first postmaster of Reedsville. The area proved to be fertile tobacco land and was caught up in a bidding war for the 364 acres that originally encompassed the town. That land was won by William Lindsay in 1858. By the end of the Civil War, Reedsville had grown to about 150 people. With a growing population and industry booming around tobacco, an entrepreneurial clergyman who lived in Madison saw potential for a new church as there was none of any denomination in the city. Reverend Jacob Dahl approached members of Bethesda Presbyterian Church and found common cause with elders Robert H. Scales and Robert P. Richardson Sr., along with Colonel James Irvin, an elder from the Wentworth Presbyterian Church. Reverend Dahl would stay in the home of Dr. Scales when he came to town, where he and his 3 compatriots would host meals for prospective members of their envisioned church. Interest grew enough that Reverend Dahl began hosting services twice a month, first in the home of Dr. Scales and on January 1, 1872, using space given by Hogan's Creek First Baptist Church. Interest in their new church only grew, so it was decided to purchase a tract of land from William Lindsay at the corner of Gilmer and Main Street for $150, an equivalent of just under $4,000 in today's value. The original church structure, built by James Walker, was constructed based on a drawing provided by Reverend Dahl. The new church was completed in the fall of 1874, and Reverend Dahl won approval for the organization of the church by the Presbytery of Orange on September 15th of that year. He moved to Reedsville in December after being elected stated supply pastor to preach 2 Sundays a month and at an annual salary of $250, or about $7,000 when adjusted for inflation. The congregation was officially organized on January 15, 1875, with 22 charter members. The new congregation elected Dr. Robert Scales and Colonel James Irvin as its first elders, and Robert Richardson Sr., who declined to serve as an elder, would act as their clerk. Reverend Dahl's years of ministry were rich and fulfilling as the church thrived under his leadership. After only 3 years, it was reported that the membership had increased from 22 to 40. But Reverend Dahl's pastorate would come to a too early end when, on April 27, 1878, he suffered a fatal heart attack while attending a meeting of the Synod in New Bern. Reverend Dahl was a tremendous leader, not just for First Presbyterian Church, but for the Presbyterian Church in Rockingham and Caswell counties, and the Presbytery and Synod, where he had served as clerk. Facing the loss of the founding pastor, church leaders turned to the denomination for support and were immediately recommended a recent graduate of Columbia Theological Seminary, David Craig, to be called as stated supply pastor for 1 year. That single year, beginning with his installation and ordination on June 1, 1879, would turn into a ministry lasting 42 years that were formative for both the church and the town. At the beginning of his pastorate, there were no paved streets in Reedsville. Reverend Craig also owned no horse or buggy, so he walked to visit with members of the congregation. At times, he was the only pastor to be found in Reedsville, so all, no matter their denomination, called on him to preside over weddings and funerals. While serving as pastor of First Presbyterian, Reverend Craig also served as supply pastor for 8 years at Bethesda Presbyterian, 4 years at Wentworth Presbyterian, and 32 years at Speedwell Presbyterian. And not only did he serve tirelessly in Reedsville, he also served the greater Presbyterian cause. He served on the home missions committees of both Orange Presbytery and the Synod, was regent of the Synod's orphan home, was stated clerk of both Orange Presbytery and the Synod of North Carolina, as well as serving as moderator of both for a time. He was a trustee of Davidson College and Union Theological Seminary, and he was elected to serve as a commissioner to General Assembly 5 times. Upon Reverend Craig's retirement, a committee was named to find a successor, and the church unanimously called Reverend Marion Husk to become the next pastor. He began his ministry on November 18, 1921, and was installed on the church's 48th anniversary, January 15, 1922. His time began with a survey of the conditions of the church, from which he developed his plan. First was the need for an increase of financial support, as the new sanctuary, begun in 1920, had yet to be completed. He also sought to reorganize the Sunday school program, develop an aggressive evangelism program to grow the church, and provide a modern manse, among other tasks. He completed these admirably, beginning with securing loans for the completion of the new sanctuary and reactivating the building committee. Though their work experienced the setback of the committee's chair's untimely death, the sanctuary was completed in the fall of 1922. The dedication of the newly built sanctuary was held off until 1935, when the debt had been successfully retired. The reorganized Sunday school program developed into a model program that went on to become emulated by many other churches in Orange Presbytery. The program grew so fast that the new building could not adequately house all the classes. So in 1935, prayers were answered when Mary Boyd Dubrell offered to give the money for a new Sunday school annex as a memorial to her family. The Boyd Memorial Annex was swiftly completed and dedicated on September 6, 1936. Further room was needed for the many who had joined the Sunday school, so in 1942, the north wing was renovated to enclose the mezzanine level. Reverend Husk's evangelistic pursuits grew the church from 160 members in 1921 to 605 members in 1954. Sunday school enrollment went from 120 in 1921 to 621 in 1954, and annual contributions grew from $7,317 in 1921, or $130,000 when adjusted for inflation, to $29,038 in 1954, or $330,000 when adjusted. His leadership also helped develop many new church leaders. During his years, 10 children of the church entered the ministry, and another 5 engaged in mission work or worked as Christian educators. Reverend Husk resigned from this pastorate on January 8, 1954, much to the sadness of the church and larger community. Following Reverend Husk and a brief interim by Hugh Montgomery, a child of the church who would later enter full-time ministry, the church called Reverend John Parks as its next pastor, and he was installed on September 26, 1954. The church accomplished several major feats during his tenure. First was the establishment of the weekday kindergarten, accredited by the state in 1956. Second was the start of the construction of a new education building. A campaign was held to raise $15,000, or $174,000 adjusted, beginning in 1956, and was wildly successful, with $155,000 being pledged, or $1.8 million adjusted, by the end of the year. Ground was broken in 1960 and completed in 1962, a year after Reverend Parks resigned. Other improvements made during Reverend Parks' pastorate was the electrification of the organ and air conditioning being added to the sanctuary, both completed in 1955, and the addition of the van-story garden between the Boyd Memorial and the Education Building, completed in 1962. After Reverend Parks' resignation, Dr. Howard Thompson served as interim minister for 9 months until Reverend Samuel Smith was called and installed on January 27, 1963. Reverend Smith continued many of the successes of his predecessors, including extensive improvements of the church property. But perhaps the single event that marked his time was the death of Elizabeth Lord Husk, wife of Reverend Marion Husk, in April 1964. It was from her death that the church received the mountain retreat in Montreat, North Carolina, named for her and dedicated in October 1968. Following Reverend Smith's resignation, no regular pastor served the church for nearly a year, during which time the church, though still thriving, fell into disrepair. The calling of Reverend Ed Brammer, who was installed on February 7, 1971, brought renewed vigor. Work was quickly done to revitalize the church, including cleaning, painting, replacing the furniture, refurnishing the nursery, and landscaping. A little over a year and a half into his pastorate, on Halloween, the debt from the educational building was retired. Much of that was thanks to the bequest by Wilmer Walker. Not only was that bequest instrumental in paying off the mortgage, but it also satisfied pledges to Queens College and the Presbyterian Home for Children. From that bequest also began the First Scholarship Fund, an annual award given to a Presbyterian student from the area or a student from Reidsville High School. Since that First Scholarship Fund was created, 3 additional scholarships have been made, resulting in thousands of dollars being awarded to local students every year. Reverend Brammer, who is also a psychologist, along with Elder James Fox, began a counseling service for residents of Rockingham County and specialized in addiction and marriage and family counseling. It was during Reverend Brammer's tenure in 1973 that the Reidsville Alcoholics Anonymous Fellowship Group first began using space in the church for their meetings. Reverend Brammer, who retired in 1991 and was made pastor emeritus in 1995, is remembered as proclaiming the love of God not only through his sermons but throughout his entire ministry. Reverend Dave Kivett was called next, beginning his pastorate in 1993. Reverend Kivett's tenure was known for action and activism within the community and presbytery. He chaired the Race Relations Council of the Chamber of Commerce, was the first president of the United Ministers of Reidsville and Vicinity, and was instrumental in starting the Reidsville Outreach Center. Reverend Kivett also helped lead the church in a capital campaign to build a ramp to the church office to make the building more accessible, along with an accessible bathroom on the first floor and a renovated reception space in the north parlor. Other improvements included the purchase of land behind the church for a larger playground for the Child Development Center. And despite these improvements, Reverend Kivett's pastorate came during a difficult time in the denomination, as conflicts began to arise between theologically conservative and liberal branches of the church, and in the city of Reidsville as the tobacco industry began to wane. After 11 years of ministry, he resigned in 2002. Following Reverend Kivett, an interim was found in Reverend Dale Walker, who is uniquely qualified to lead the church through deep division and into a time of healing. It was during her time that the church constructed a columbarium 6 years after the committee was originally formed. Her 3 years of leadership helped the session and church prepare for its next pastor, the Reverend Doug McElroy. Reverend McElroy began his career in the U.S. Army, serving as a chaplain from 1975 to 2004. He then began his first and only pastoral ministry here in Reidsville. His pastorate was one in which considerable time and attention was devoted to renewing the spiritual life of the church. It was during his time that communion began as a weekly tradition in order to wed our services more deeply to the sacraments, and that child acolytes began processing in the cross, shepherd's crook, and flames at the beginning of worship. Reverend McElroy also oversaw a capital campaign to modernize the fellowship hall, among other spaces, and created the prayer room in the former pastor's office next to the session room. Reverend McElroy retired in 2017 and was named pastor emeritus later that same year. The Reverend Christy Clore, a Moravian pastor, served as interim following Reverend McElroy's retirement and led the church in creating a large-scale mission study to analyze what ministry could look like moving forward in the church and in the greater Reidsville area. Reverend Wes Pitts was then called as the next and current pastor beginning in October 2019 and ordained and installed on January 26, 2020. Just a few months into Reverend Pitts' ministry, the world entered a lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. His first years were spent organizing ways to reach the congregation while regular services were not possible. And during that time, the Belmont Mansion was graciously offered to the church to use for outdoor services by member Charlie Adams, then owner of the home, and the church also began offering online worship, first via video uploaded several hours after the service and then via live stream. While many churches suffered irreparable damage due to the pandemic, First Presbyterian has not only been able to survive, but has thrived, growing in membership and initiating new programs to benefit the church and wider community. Seeing a need for the aging sanctuary building to be revitalized, a $600,000 capital campaign was launched in 2023 to tackle many of the structural issues that have developed over the years and refocusing the church's use in the main building. Among the projects to be completed are foundation repairs along the south wall of the sanctuary and in the boiler room, a renovated upper room above the north parlor, fresh paint inside and outside the building, replacing the original plaster ceilings in the sanctuary, a new roof on the education building, new HVAC units in the Boyd Memorial Wing and the education building, and the addition of new signage inside and outside the church. To date, nearly $500,000 has been pledged to this 4-year campaign, and several projects have already been completed. Early in Reverend Pitts' ministry, he asked the congregation to respond to questions about their visions for the future, and the overwhelming majority noted an interest in mission, and so mission work has become a larger focus of church life. New partnerships have been created with Rockingham United to host a mobile food pantry in the Circle Drive neighborhood once a month. A program to furnish the homes of newly arriving refugees in partnership with Church World Service has already successfully furnished 2 homes. Members are helping stock the food pantry at Reidsville High School. A knitting ministry has begun creating prayer shawls and lap robes for members of the church, as well as those in hospice, nursing homes, and dialysis patients. The church has begun hosting National Night Out cookouts each year, and much more. In addition, a new non-traditional worship service was started in 2024. This service seeks to welcome those in the community, of which fewer than one-third belong to a worshiping community, an opportunity to find a comfortable and relaxed place to worship that's still wedded to the message of love and justice found at First Presbyterian. With the sesquicentennial occurring in his pastorate, Reverend Pitts has aimed to help First Presbyterian begin a new chapter in its life, one marked by growth in faith and action in Reedsville and beyond. In addition to faithfully serving the congregation, Reverend Pitts is actively involved in the community, serving on the board of the Reedsville Chamber of Commerce and treasurer of the Reedsville Kiwanis Club, and with Salem Presbytery, where he has served as co-moderator of the Peace and Justice Task Force, moderator of the Commission on Ministries Task Force for Ministry in the Changing Church, moderator of the sessions of Speedwell Presbyterian and Madison Presbyterian, and has served as a commissioner to General Assembly twice. But as impressive as the ministers who have served First Presbyterian are, what makes a church are its people. Without active and engaged members, there would be no church. Since 1875, the members of First Presbyterian have been instrumental in Reedsville and have enabled the church to become a vital community of faith in the region. Through many years of active ministry, the members of this church have created lasting and transformative memories.
What are some of your favorite memories of this church?
When I was fortunate enough to have a little baby, and we came to the church, and the little baby was christened or baptized. And that made me so happy.
I went away for about 10 years, from 73 to 83, education, and then moving back in 83, I had married Susan. We got married here in Reedsville, but one of my treasured moments was, even though we didn't get married in the church, we got married at Belmont, and Ed Brammer was the preacher that was conducting the service. And of course, that's a very special moment in my life, as is the baptism of my 4 sons. That was very special.
It's always near and dear to my heart when infants are baptized. I love to see our minister holding them up front, presenting them to the church, and then asking our church to support and help raise them. I think that is something that we should take to heart, and so that always makes me smile here at First Pres.
Well, First Presbyterian means so much to me. I grew up in this church. I was married here. My children grew up attending here.
So I moved to Reedsville when I was 5, 1995. I met my best friend, Ian Hughes Carroll, here. And I got married here. My husband got baptized here, and both girls got baptized here. So lots of special memories here.
have so many memories at First Presbyterian because I grew up in this church, and I can walk through these hallways and these memories just come back to me. My very best friends in the world I met here in the Sunday school classes, preschool age, and also went to kindergarten here. I have an incredible memory every time I walk in the nursery. Those big old wooden blocks that are from back in the 50s, I guess, we had those in my kindergarten room, and they were just as loud and clunky back then, and they still look just as good as they did back then. This whole church is just one big memory for me.
My favorite memories are teaching Sunday school and being in a church filled with children. And
as I grew and as a youth, we had a very active youth fellowship, and we had a great group of girls and boys that participated in that fellowship. And on Sunday nights, we would meet in the fellowship hall, and inevitably the boys would migrate upstairs to the second floor where the classrooms are, and we invented a game that was a hybrid between hockey and soccer, and we called it Hocker. And what we did, we would get a block from the children's room, just a wooden block, and we looked for brooms or whatever to use as hockey sticks, but there weren't enough to go around, so we would kick that block. And one of the goals was the far wall of the hallway in the classroom, and then the other goal was the steps leading up to the upper classrooms. And there were no rules. There were, it was like a brawl, and everybody, we had a great time, played it a lot. And of course, you always ended up with bruised ankles or shins or whatever, but it was a good pastime, a good way that the boys spent their time in youth fellowship.
Another favorite memory is with the youth is playing different games in the church, like sardines, when everybody would go and hide, and we would have to go and hide with somebody else. So it's just made my growing up and coming to church a lot more fun and interesting. And also all the kids used to sit in the top loft, and yeah, we would occasionally drop some pens, some crayons, or a hymnal, sometimes never a Bible, but we would occasionally drop some things.
also I had the opportunity to lead our youth for about 7 years. And with that came a robust group of young people who I watched grow in Christ, bond together. We have many, many fond memories at our Montreat house, where we would have annual trips. We would go in the summer and we would whitewater raft, and in the winter we would snow ski. And lots of fun, lots of meals together. Only remember having to call a parent, or threatened to call a parent one time, and that was for smoking, and that was cigarettes. So we had one broken arm. We had Mike Donovan and I fell out of a raft that capsized. We survived. And then we did have a virus that took out about 75% of our group by the time we got home. But other than that, for those 7 years, it was lots of fun, lots of interaction with our youth, spending time together and learning each other.
at the church would have been us going to Montreat. We spent a lot of time up at Montreat, whether it was whitewater rafting, skiing, doing the murder mysteries, just going up to Montreat just to have a good time. There was always weekends that we would go to Montreat just to do stuff, and the kids would always be together.
We've had as many as 20. The Montreat house sleeps 18. Had as many as 25 up there. So we had to buy extra cots and mattresses for them to sleep on. And it was great.
Speaking of Montreat, as we were married and had children, the Richardsons and the Snows and the Stenhouses and the McLeods would go to Montreat for Thanksgiving, and that was very special. We always went up there, and it was just the cold, brisk days that we did our best to stay warm, which was a challenge at times, but we always had a good time.
Well, I'll start back when I first joined. We moved to Reedsville when I got out of the Air Force in 1972, and being a lifelong Presbyterian, I immediately joined this church. My earliest memories were about how friendly the people were, how much fellowship there was here, what a good spiritual place it was to be.
When we first moved to Reedsville, we looked at several churches, and then we came here. The first time we came, everyone, I think, spoke to us. We felt like family from the beginning, and we're still here.
We had not been in Reedsville very long when our oldest little girl, who right before her her fourth birthday, fell ill one day and died. It was a severe viral infection followed by what is now called a MRSA infection. And I was there with her the whole time and was not able to save her. Denise and I both got very, very angry at God, and went through a trying time with our faith. We really had support from this church. The minister, but the other people that we knew supported us in a tremendous way, so that we were able to go through that valley of darkness and enter that dark tunnel, but come out the other end into the light with a stronger faith than we went in. And I will always remember the support we got from the church members.
Another memory when I was little was we sat on the back pew where Lynn and Fred Wilkins sit now. And when I was a little boy, of course, I couldn't see the pulpit because of all the folks that were in front of me. And as I grew and finally could see the church instead of the back of everybody's head, I just realized how beautiful our sanctuary is. And I think we have one of the prettiest sanctuaries around.
And then recently, I've gotten to help out with our modern praise worship band in our modern services. So I get to play some rhythm guitar there with Dustin and a few other members of our church. So that's a whole lot of fun.
We really have enjoyed the music program at this church. We had a very strong program when Dennis was our music director. Denise actually sang in the choir, and she was a director of the children's choir. We had quite a few children in those days, and she enjoyed that tremendously. So she sat in the choir. My kids and I were on the back of the church, and they were not behaving like I thought they should behave, so I moved them down to the front, and started sitting with them on the row we did now, the second row of the pews. And they looked up at Mr. Brown and thought probably he was God. And they behaved down there. It was very interesting. I'll always remember the first Sunday that we were allowed to serve the children communion. We were passing the trays with the small glasses in them in those days. And we passed them down our road. All of my 3 girls then took a little glass. I looked over at Hope, and she was swishing hers around like you had seen her mother swish her wine around. I looked at Lowry, and she immediately spilt it. Pete Turner, who babysat some for us, was actually sitting on the other end of my children. She saved the day by pouring Lowry a bit of her juice into her glass, and Lowry realized that as she looked up at Mr. Brown, that maybe she wasn't going to hell at that 1 minute.
What are some of your hopes for the future
Of the church.
of the church?
I would like to see this church grow in love within the church and also outside of the church, that Jesus can be our true leader, and they will walk in his ways and love people and serve people as he did when he was here on earth.
Well, the church can grow in membership, and we can maintain the buildings we have, the grounds.
Hopes for the future that we continue to grow, which we've already made steps with a contemporary modern service, and just that my kids have a great childhood church like I did here.
The future of the church, I think we all know that church attendance is down for various reasons. Not just here, but I mean everywhere. And I think that some of the challenges that the church faces would be how to adapt to some of those changes. And I think that efforts are made to do so. But I think that our church is at the forefront of continuing to assist those in need, the poor, the lost, the outcast, and I would like to think that that would continue. I think it does. I think it will.
And my hopes for the future of the church are the same as my favorite memories. I would love to see the church go back to the way that it was when people really went to church, but I realize it's a systemic problem and it's not, something that we can just change, but it would be nice to see more and more young people come into church and bring in their children and then watch the church grow that way.
My hopes that we will continue to grow. I don't think there's any particular benefit in becoming a large church. We're not nearly as big as we were when we first joined the church, but that's okay, as well as we can continue the spiritual mission that I think we're on today. I see us being a positive factor in the community, which I think we are now, and letting that role grow, but also being a home for people to come to. They are in need of help, that we can help them as much as possible.
I hope to see the sanctuary filled up every week.
I hope for the future to hold an expansion of what is already a very good and robust mission and outreach. I hope that we can attract many more families, young families with children.
And I hope for the future that it will continue to be a place of love, that people come to find comfort and joy. And may our church grow in not only numbers, but in love.
I think we're doing great as it is, just keep on going, teaching the children and stuff, getting a new generation in here to keep the church going, keep on sharing these stories, these great memories, and just sharing love overall.
To continue to grow our mission, connecting lives to Christ, and do that by serving our community that we live in and the community surrounding this church. This church is right here on Main Street. There are homeless people that live here. Within a few blocks is our soup kitchen. Our church serves at our soup kitchen. I'm the congregational care nurse for the church, so I've done blood pressure screenings at the soup kitchen, so I'd like to continue that mission there. Wes and I are actually talking about mental health, and there is a gap in care in Rockingham County for mental health. And what does that look like? How can our church work on a strategic plan to help with the mental health crisis in Rockingham County and within our community? So I was very proud that during the pandemic, we hosted a COVID vaccine clinic here at our church. And not too long ago, we did a mental health first aid workshop that was at capacity. So continuing to reach out to our community, see what they need, and try to identify the needs and then work on solving that. So that's, I think our church is positioned in a wonderful part of Reidsville. We have a long history here, and I think we can have a definite impact on our community.
Well, my daughter, Ava Grace, is now the 5th generation in the church. So my hopes for the future of the church is to continue to grow, have generations keep coming in the church, grow our children's program like it was when I was here, because that's one of my fond memories. So that would be a huge hope for the future, is that Ava Grace could have the fellowship with youth as I had here, because it really did make my foundation very strong and all that support.